What happens to us after we die? Do we cease to exist, or do we live on? This may be the biggest question that mankind has ever asked, as well as what this podcast is about. In this show, we will examine past life memories, speak with professional hypnotherapists, astral projection practitioners, psychics, and much more, all in an attempt to decipher this riddle. So welcome to the puzzle. Welcome to the regression session. Welcome back to the regression session. My name is Ian. This week we're going to be doing a little bit different, whereas I'm kind of the one that gets interviewed by Caleb. And Caleb is the host of the Free Range Mystics podcast, along with Ed, Gabe, and Kim. And he kind of wanted to do a split episode where we're going to upload this episode to both shows. But he interviewed me, which gives you guys a little bit of a chance to hear my thoughts on some stuff. If you haven't already, head on over to my Facebook page. It's in the description, but it's the Regression Session podcast. I actually post a lot more content on there nowadays. I post kind of like sneak peeks of the guests. I post some additional content to other creators, some meditations, just various other random stuff too. So head on over to that again. That's facebook.com/the Regression Session podcast. And I'd love to have you there. If you want to come onto the show to share your past life experiences or your knowledge on any metaphysical topics, shoot me an email. My email is theregressionsession@gmail.com. And here is my conversation with Caleb.
Before we go further, let's get started. So I think we could use what we have already, but yeah, we're already starting to get into it. So,
yeah, man. If you just want to, just for my audience sake and your audience sake, I'm sure that they already know you, but for my audience sake, if you'd introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah. So my name is Caleb. I'm the host of the Free Range Mystics podcast. It's very similar to what Ian is doing with the regression session, and we got to talking, so we're gonna do something a little bit different, maybe today. So I really want, we reached out and we've talked a little bit before, but I really wanted to talk to you about your profession and what you're doing with regression hypnotherapy. So when I was listening to your episodes, that's something that I kept wanting to ask more about. So many of your guests have fascinating stories to share, but you get to provide insight, but not really too much more than like a quip or an anecdote. So I'd like to ask you and find out more about the past life regression hypnotherapy field in general. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of, introducing it to me, like if you could abbreviate it, and then I have some questions prepared, but I'm pretty sure that it'll go, where the wind takes us.
Yeah, for sure. So past life regression is kind of, it's like a branch off of traditional regression hypnosis. So I kind of feel like it was a lost art, like people were doing it thousands of years ago. I have no necessarily proof of that, but hypnosis has been used for quite a while to treat like past trauma from your current life, so like childhood trauma, where people will like block the memories of something traumatic that happened to them, or even like behavioral modification, things like that. And it's kind of like the next step from that. It was not discovered, but like kind of popularized by a gentleman named Michael Newton. He's kind of one of the pioneers that that did it. His background is he kind of discovered it on accident, being a traditional hypnotherapist where he would work on behavioral modification. He would help people quit smoking or stop being afraid of heights or, whatever. That's what he would specialize in. And he would also specialize in psychosomatic pain, which is usually caused by trauma in this life. So basically what happened is a gentleman came in with some kind of a pain in his body that he had countless medical examinations done. And the doctors were like, there's nothing physically wrong with you. We think this is psychosomatic. You should go see a hypnotherapist just to kind of see if you can figure out where this comes from and see if you can stop it. The guy goes to Mr. Newton or Dr. Newton, and Dr. Newton tells him to go to the source of his pain, and fully expecting him to be like something like, oh, when I was a kid, I fell off my bike and it hurt, or I don't know, whatever. But the guy starts talking about how he had a past life and how he was severely injured in that spot that he was experiencing pain. And that was the source. And Dr. Newton was pretty skeptical about it. He was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And he tried it again just to see if he could recreate it without like telling people what he was doing. And then he was able to recreate it over and over and over. And he built this pattern, and he found out like that hundreds and thousands of people were recounting the same things. So that's kind of a brief history. I mean, there's obviously other pioneers like Dolores Cannon. She has her own method that's a little bit different, but there's a few different people who've pioneered this and created a bunch of different methods. But he's like one of the main ones. Also, Dr. Brian Weiss. He's probably the most popular.
I was also going to mention Dr. Ian Stevenson, also a similar study. So as far as people looking for, they want to put it to the rigors of academia, there are already some people who have pushed into these fields. I'm going to kind of jump to the meat of it. I was doing some research, and one of the papers that I read was like, is hypno past life is, I don't even know how to put all the words together properly now. But is it harmful to people? Is there a risk that somebody could somehow be worse off after going into one of these sessions? So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. It's a risk. I mean, it's a risk with traditional hypnosis as well. Even if you get on like we talked before about how people like your main exposure to hypnosis was like the people who jump up on stage and hypnotize a bunch of people and make them do weird things, right? Even that could potentially, if they didn't know what they were doing or if they did it incorrectly, that could be harmful. And the reason is because when you're in hypnosis, you're suggestible. Okay. So I actually have an episode about this. It's called Let's Talk About Past Life Regression. And I've linked on my Twitter and my Facebook as well for anybody listening. Another podcast that I listen to that I'm going to be connecting with here soon that talks about this as well. But basically what you want to look for in someone who's practicing past life hypnosis is somebody who isn't going to screw with your head, right? So you need to talk to them. You need to figure out their process. You need to figure out their history. So how many people have they successfully done this with? What have they, what's their success rate? Things like that. But it's back to the question itself, as far as like why it could be harmful is, like I said, you're suggestible. So the main argument for it being unethical is what they call it, is that you're quote unquote creating false memories. That's their main argument. But here's the thing that I would say, especially the way that I do it, is I do not ask leading questions. I literally, when I do it, I will say, okay, so what is emerging before you? Like, what do you see? What's happening? Okay, are you wearing anything on your feet? Are you standing somewhere specific? So, like, I try to ask very open-ended questions, and I allow people to speak and talk about what they're actually experiencing, and I don't ask them like, okay, so is it this or this? Unless, obviously there's exceptions, like if we've already been like diving down a specific subject and I've already got a lot of details, maybe I'll ask something to clarify, but for the most part, I let people just talk about their experience, and that's what I think is the proper way to do it, because that way you're not fabricating anything, and that's kind of, I feel, the proper way to do it.
Well, that's pretty much the linchpin of the entire argument is that so first off, there's three layers of the entire process, right? So hypnosis by itself, there's no doubt about that being a state that you are suggestible in, and that not everybody's the same. So there's a certain level, I believe, some people are more suggestible than others, or I guess more available to this concept. But then it goes, so it goes one step further. You also have to believe basically in a soul, and then you have to believe in reincarnation. The premise of the paper is, there's no proof of a soul anyways. Reincarnation is pretty much ridiculous, thought to give any type of precedent to. And then last but not least is it's that when you do regress these people, you're asking leading questions and you're implanting false memories. And under those circumstances, it's pretty much a farce. But talking to you, so far, I mean, that's really the main thing. I mean, without providing those leading questions and letting people, I guess, lead themselves, it defeats that argument, right? But what about the other two? How do you feel about people having a soul in past life regression? Was that something that was an idea that you adopted? Like, is that part of your personal faith? Is that something that do you have, I guess, how do you take that? Because it has to go along with the hypnotherapy, right? They need to also believe these things, or do you find that people don't or are surprised, or how does that play out?
It really depends, man. So, I mean, like, if people are against it, that's when they're going to not experience anything. You know what I mean? If they're totally against the whole concept of like, I don't want to be hypnotized, I don't believe in this is ridiculous, nothing's going to happen to me, that's where they're going to have a really, really hard time with it having any kind of an experience. I have had people who don't necessarily believe in anything. For my brother, for example, he was the first person that I ever regressed, and I did it as a joke. I've said this multiple times on my show, but I did it kind of as a joke. I was like, "Hey, Jacob, you wanna see your past lives, bro? I have a past life hypnosis script here." And he was like, "Yeah, sure, haha, whatever." And so we sat down. I did this hypnosis, and all of a sudden, and before I get in any further, my brother's like a very stoic man. He doesn't like to cry. He doesn't really make things up. He's a pretty down to earth, straightforward man. Doesn't really show a lot of emotion. He had an experience where he was a one-eyed woman who was born with one eye back in, like, I want to say like the 30s. He couldn't really narrow it down. Like he thinks it was sometime in like the 30s or the 20s maybe, but she was a social outcast, and she died of starvation and or exposure to the elements alone. And he was just sobbing. He was sitting there like sobbing in his chair, and I was shaken. Like, honestly, I was seriously like just shook because I wasn't expecting this. My brother has only cried to me a handful of times in my life, and we were totally relaxed. We were just coming home from having a hangout at my parents' house or whatever, And then we were just basically chilling at home. It wasn't like a stressful day or anything. There was nothing that really could trigger that sobbing.
So is your brother, I mean, would you think that he was a suggestible person before, like, would it have occurred to you that he was a candidate or suggestible for that type of past life regression? I'm sure you none of you were ready to get walloped emotionally, but did it surprise you that it even worked on him, or do because it seems to me like some people are just ready to jump into their imagination subconscious, and some people have just kind of a more, like you said, a stoic approach where they're not super concerned about their mental development in a spiritual way.
That's kind of where he is at. He's still an atheist. He still kind of was just like, yeah. And I've regressed him twice, and he's had insane experiences both times. One time, the second time, we were able to get a name, a city, a state, a street, like a street name, a street address, things like that, which was crazy, by the way. But he still to this day is just he literally is just an atheist, and he just tells me, like, yeah, I don't know what I believe. I don't really believe in anything. It was an interesting experience. One thing that is really interesting, though, is after the first regression, he thought that this one-eyed woman lived somewhere in Europe. That's what he said. He felt like it was somewhere in Europe. And afterwards, it was like, I want to say like 11:30 at night when we were finished with his. And then I gave him the script, and he did one to me, which was interesting. That's another story. But we ended up going to McDonald's, and there's a bus stop like right next to this McDonald's that we went to. And there was this dude standing at the bus stop, just like really, like really creepily staring at us in the truck. And we pulled up to get our food. And I just kind of jokingly said to my brother, I was like, so what would you do if when we drove away, that guy tried to jump in your truck? And he said something that he's never said once in his entire life before or since. And he was even like weirded out by him saying it. And he used the word in the proper context. He said that he would get out and say, "Hey, pup, what are you doing?" Now, the word there was pup. And I Googled it, and I was like, okay, what does this mean? I Googled like pup slang. What does it mean? Apparently, it was used as a slang term for an overambitious young man over in Ireland back in like the 1930s to 40s. And he had never used that, but he used it in the correct context, which was really interesting to me that he had that and he had no idea about that beforehand.
I kind of like this idea that we get to have the benefit of our genetic code to rely, like, so I buy into this concept that your subconscious mind can access anything that's in your DNA, right? So from the like very first split of DNA to all its divisions where you are now. So to me, that seems different than him having like a random, like, did he feel like that was an ancestor? Like, is he picking up like the memory of ancestors, or is this like a random human being? He doesn't feel like he has any, or is that something that people feel? Like, I saw a lot of, hey, I was this person, who was in my family before, which makes sense if my theory is right, where you can access your code, so to speak. And then also on, one more level to that question is, with that like identity popping in and out, Dr. Ian Stevenson, he suggests that the gender identity crisis is really people blending alternate genders that they've lived. So if they've lived like their last life was as a woman, then they're more likely going to have, and look, it sounds a little bit ridiculous when I'm saying it, but this, that they would have an inclination towards that gender more so than somebody who didn't, or maybe that's like their actual gender where they favor one way or the other. I don't know. But so do you find that these past lives are people that are down the tree of their ancestry? And do you see a lot of that personality or past lives bleed into their current, persona or ego?
So one thing that's really interesting is that, like, yeah, there are people who remember being coming down through their genetic line, but in my experience, that's a lot more rare than than what am I trying to say? That's the exception rather than the rule in my experience. And here's kind of what I've come up with as a theory. And just keep in mind, when I started doing this stuff, I was an atheist and I did it as a joke, right? Because I came from being Mormon. I was like spiritually exhausted. Like I didn't want to, I wasn't ready to believe in anything. I was just messing around. That's literally what I was doing. And then as soon as that happened, I got so fascinated by it that I was trying to like prove that it was real. Okay. And I got my proof later, which blew my mind. But so I'm almost completely fully bought in to the whole thing. But here's my theory. And if you read Dr. Newton's books, this is kind of what he thinks as well, is that the reason that it's more the exception rather than the rule is because if you keep on going down the same genetic family line, you're not going to have as many varied experiences that you would otherwise. Right. So, if you're born in the United States for one lifetime, and then you go to Russia for another one, and then you go all the way over to Africa, and then South America for another one, those are going to be all completely different experiences. And I have actually had the thought of that same exact thing that you were talking about if you're just inherently attracted to a certain gender, regardless of what gender you choose to be in the next life, you would probably still be attracted to that. Now, on the flip side of that, if you're used to being a woman or a man, and then you're like, oh, you know what, maybe I want to try it from another perspective, and you haven't really been on that gender very many times in your incarnation history, I can definitely see why it would be uncomfortable.
Now this is another question, and it seems to be pretty common as well. Does anyone ever have like a cool past life regression where they're not being murdered or involved in some horrible deed, either directly or indirectly? That seems to be like there's always trauma, and maybe it's just that those traumatic experiences stick out. But I mean, isn't there ever like goodness, or like it was, I have a past life and nothing bad happened to me, I just remember it?
Well, I mean, life is full of good and bad. You know what I'm saying? Like all life. Your life right now is probably full of good and bad too. It's the same thing with past lives I've seen. Um, as far as like being murdered or anything like that, I've regressed people who've just kind of had a pretty peaceful life. Like there was this one woman who I regressed. I actually have an interview with her that's in my bonus catalog, my bonus episode catalog. But she was kind of like she came from a wealthy family, and then she was going to be married, like an arranged marriage. So she ran away from home and then realized she didn't have anywhere to go. So she came back and then got married to this gentleman who is also from a well-off family. She fell really deeply in love with this man, and then he died before they could have any kids of something. And then she just kind of inherited his money and then inherited her family's money and then just lived a really peaceful, quiet life. And then the main scene of the life that we spent a lot of time in was when she was about to die. And what she was doing in this scene was just looking at her old body, like, just like her in the mirror. She was looking at herself, brushing her hair in the mirror. And she knew that once she went to bed that night, she wasn't going to wake up. So she just brushed her hair and she got her nice nightgown on and went and laid to bed and fell asleep, and she passed away. And that's the life that she remembered. So it's not always people being murdered. There's not always a traumatic death. Some people have died of just old age in my regressions.
So I want to step it up a little bit. We're talking about past lives that are here on Earth, and I also want to one aside, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, they feel that, or they express that it takes 56 days for the soul to go through the bardos, and then that it's going to, then, when you find, if you don't escape, whatever, if you're reincarnated, um, you're reincarnated based on location. So, you reincarnate, your spirit will be somewhere near you down. You'll find like the nearest next available fetus to jump into. Um, so, do you get like and so there's like in between time. Do you ever get a sense of that in between lives? And then, and then to go one step further, it has come up a couple times, I think, on your show too. But what about people who have like, uh, alien past lives, or past lives that are, would be suited for like a sci-fi or a fantasy setting where, they've reincarnated as a Palladian, or they were in Atlantis, those types. Do you also come across that as well?
Yeah, so I'll answer your first one. So there's this technique called life between life regression. So what that does is you go through a past life and you go up into the death scene. It takes a long time because you're basically doing two regressions in one. So you go through this whatever past life, and then you go through your death scene, and then you follow your soul after you die. So you just kind of go through that journey. A lot of the time people will describe the same things. I recently did a regression with someone where they passed away. They went up to this. They usually, people describe it usually as it's just a space. It's not, they don't call it like a place. They're like, it just is. You can't really describe it. And a lot of people will describe people looking at like something that the only term that they can use to describe it is like a book or a blueprint or something of that nature, where they're kind of looking out at plotted points on their life. And I haven't, in my own experience, I've only experienced this a couple times, but basically what I've seen is people will say, okay, I plotted out in that past life X amount of things that I wanted to accomplish. And then this blueprint or this like translucent book thing shows me where I followed these goals or these milestones and where I deviated from it. And then you go through a life review and that kind of tells you what you accomplished and did you accomplish your goals, and you decide kind of what you wanted to learn and what you didn't learn. And then a lot of the time I've talked to people about planning their next life. So they'll go through and they'll create a new blueprint about, okay, this is what I want to learn. In Michael Newton's books, this is kind of what he found as well among his clients, where people will actually plot out their next life and then they're given options for the next life that they want to pick. It's really confusing, and you kind of have to, like, if you want to read Journey of Souls by Michael Newton, he does a really good job of putting all this data together. But I've seen people plan out their next life, and what they want to learn, and certain things that may or may not happen to teach them hard lessons. As far as alien past lives go, yes, I have had someone have an alien past life. It was pretty wild. I'm not going to talk about it because I have a recording of it and I'm going to upload it to my show. So look forward to that. But it was an alien past life, and it was really, really cool.
So, first, I'm glad that there is some context between the between life phases. There's some parallel there. I think what they're describing in people who are into astral projection, that there's like a certain level where you enter a void state. I would consider this to be like the pinnacle of astral projection, but it's like you were trying to describe. It's not nothing, but there is something there, and it's difficult to put into words. And in some occult theories, there's this process where when the soul dies, I guess, or when the body dies and the soul travels, it goes through like each planetary body and is basically your soul communicates with like each planet, right? It'll be you'll disseminate information back and forth with it, And in each one of those planets represents like a different um, concept about your human self. Same thing with chakras or any of those systems that break people down into elements. But you see it again and again is this concept that the soul travels, and as it travels, it goes kind of in this wave form pattern where it goes up and then back down. And at the very pinnacle of it is like where the soul meets the Godhead, and it finally drops back down into physical form. But I'm saying that just to kind of emphasize the point of that there does seem to be a consensus, even from people who are, deeply spiritual and looking into this stuff intentionally, and people, I guess, are describing it between these past life regression experiences of the soul getting to communicate or interact with something other than itself, and that being a progressive experience, like you're building on to something and diving back into your mortal life. So it's interesting to hear that from this as well. It kind of reinforces that idea. But with the alien thing, I had for a while, I was convinced that I had a past life on an alien world, right? And I did some like real hard meditation to figure out where that was coming from. And I finally found it. Like I used to read. You ever read those Forgotten Realm books Ari Salvatore wrote? I don't know if you're ever into like those old fantasy books, but
No.
I completely stole all of that. Like I was unboxing my books and I forgot that I'd had packed for so long, and then it all came flooding back to me. So like all these books that I read as a teenager, I forgot. Then as an adult, I built this mythology, like this kind of personal mythology around like why I have these mystical feelings or belief. The same with everybody, especially when they get into this type of thought, thought sequence where you're thinking about the world in abstract ways. And so you start to like place symbols on things that you recognize or things that you may not recognize, but you try to make sense of them. And I found that I was doing that, and I felt like at first I was embarrassed because it was so obvious, like everything was right there already written for me. I just forgot. And then I kind of backtracked on being embarrassed, and then I just kept using it because it was useful for me. So I guess what I'm leading to is, do you feel like that also comes up where you're dealing with a situation where it's not a past life, but it's somebody who is drudging up like other memories, like because the practice of hypnosis without the past life regression, it seems that's also something that they do is they're trying to like pull things out that were forgotten or memories from that have been accumulated or packed away. There's a word for it. I forget what it is, but is that something that you also encounter as well?
In a traditional mindset of materialism, the answer would be yes, you made it all up. Plain and simple, hardcore. If you're looking at it from a different perspective, kind of where, and I really didn't I really didn't want to go down this road when I first started. Like I wanted to be so scientific about it. I wanted to be so methodical and like documenting things. But as I moved along, my perspective has changed on a lot of things, and I really didn't. And we kind of talked about this when we talked the other day about how like challenging your own beliefs, because I had just barely come into this new belief of past lives, and all of a sudden it's morphing and changing, and I only will change it based off of data, because I don't want to have that feeling that you said of feeling like a fool. So like I said, the traditional answer of materialism and traditional science would be, yeah, you read those books, you made it all up. Another perspective is that you use those experiences to process what you were seeing, and you assign that those values to your experience to process what you're seeing. Because there's some things that I've had clients see that were just so weird and so wild that it literally pulled them out of the hypnosis. They're like, okay, I've never seen this before. I don't know what's happening. This is so weird. I think I'm coming out of hypnosis because I don't know what's happening. So an archetype is like a characterer, I don't even know how to say that, but that you kind of assign to help and your brain does this with a lot of things. It'll like, for example, I don't know if you ever heard of the phenomena pareidolia.
Well, yeah, it's where you see faces.
Yeah, exactly.
Make you the mind sees patterns, right? You pick out, and this is for survival. You've evolved to like pick out certain things,
Yes, exactly. So I think that like we're very hardwired, especially in today's society in the Western world, to believe in science. So if you did have a past experience and you didn't really know how to process it, maybe that information came flooding in order to help you. I mean, obviously there is still the possibility that you made it all up, right? It may or may not be real. I can't prove to you that you experienced a past life and then assign these archetypes to that to process the information. But I kind of have moved away from wanting to prove anything to anyone, because my philosophy now is, regardless of whether or not the experience is real, it's still a real experience. Because a lot of the time, what's happening, regardless, like if we're just going to look at this from purely science and just say, okay, all these past lives are made up, right? Let's just pretend for a second that that's what I believe. All these past lives are made up, but when you go into these past lives, it presents a unique opportunity to allow you as the subject to look at your current life from a third person perspective. So if you were able to basically assume the identity of another person and look at yourself, and that really gives you a unique opportunity to kind of pick apart your self-destructive behaviors and criticize yourself in a way that you're going to be more receptive to, because you're talking about quote unquote another person. And that's really what is helpful, especially for people who are having those self-destructive behaviors.
Look, that's super boring, right? Because what you're basically saying is that you're providing a form of therapy where the person can, they can pick. It's like getting a like an avatar, right? Like, okay, make an avatar of yourself on a video game, and then like your judge, you can make assumptions about their personality. I think that's probably the most level-headed approach, and I would tend to agree with that for the most part. Like, it's always helpful, but I think where like the past life regression thing goes from being like just therapeutic to exciting for a lot of people, it gives people hope for more than that, right? They don't, and I'm assuming what they want, right? But I think, and I agree with you 100% from a materialistic standpoint, where it doesn't matter. It's meta information that's helpful one way or the other. But what about like it being real though? Like, isn't the implication that people are, they're here and they're reincarnating over and over and over again? Doesn't that in and of itself provide a type of hope that people are looking for? And so when you're trying to prove it to be real or not, it's not this, you're put in this context of either or when it's a both and. In my opinion, it can be both and. But I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit, kind of losing my direction. But I guess
I get what you're saying. Like I know what you're saying for sure, and like I understand that, and I agree with you. Like, it can be both. Why not? Why not both? You know what I mean? But I've kind of moved away from trying to prove it for that exact reason, because really what it's about is helping people. And that's kind of like what you said something about, like the main point that the counter argument has for reincarnation and past life regression being a scam and being harmful is that you can't prove that reincarnation is real. But what about when you can? That's the real question here. Because I've had people who I know for a fact didn't know anything about what they were describing. And then we were able to like Google it and find the exact thing they were talking about after the fact. Like, the guy had no idea. I have interviewed this gentleman on my show. He was able to describe a tribe in Africa, and he described their clothing, their environment. He described their the huts that they lived in, their culture, how they're a matriarchy, how the men are gone for like most of the year being shepherds. Basically, they live in Namibia, or he said like Zambia or Namibia. He wasn't sure. Sure enough, these people live in Namibia. He talked about how they put clay in their hair, all sorts of stuff. Like he described their whole entire culture. And after the fact, I was like, "Did you know anything about a tribe in Africa?" He's like, "No, I didn't." And I've known this guy for a long time, and he has no reason to make it up because he was kind of skeptical going into it as well. So the question is, where did that information come from?
Yeah, what the does that mean? Like, all right, let's like if we're neutral, it doesn't matter one way or the other. So we don't have any skin in the game for it to work out, you know. So we take care of this information. You mentioned Dr. Brian Weiss. Also, and they're finding evidence that suggests that this is, you know, compelling evidence, in my opinion. I mean, even if half the people are lying, these are accounts of thousands and thousands. You found evidence yourself, in your own practice. So, what's the implication after that? I mean, does that mean we have a soul, that there is like that we live in a universe that's trying to teach us lessons? So when these people go to these in between states, or is that the implication then, that we're not like sovereign in ourselves, that there's still a higher power, and then we lead into these other concepts of like God and a creator? I think that's just where like some people get really excited and some people get hung up. But doesn't I mean isn't that where this leads, or is there like another option? You know, I mean,
Okay,
what do you think?
let's just, knowing the fact that I know that there's no way he could have known that, and they're called the Himba people, Himba. You can Google it, you can look it up. He described everything that shows up in that wiki article. It kind of creeped me out, honestly. It really
Yeah.
did. I was really weirded out by it.
When magic works, it's really fucking weird. Like nobody likes to admit it, and you're always kind of scared. And then when it starts to work for real, it's different. You weren't really ready for it to be
Yeah,
there.
it's weird, man. And basically, there's three different types of implications that I can think of off the top of my head. So the first one, the obvious one, is yeah, we're here, we're experiencing things, we're reincarnating, and then we're able to access that through our subconscious mind, right? That's the first implication. The second one, that just off the top of my head, would be psychic influence. So somebody in close proximity was having these thoughts about this tribe, or they knew about this tribe, and then they were influencing John in his altered state of consciousness and kind of psychically projecting this information. However, there's a problem with that because all the people in the room had no idea what the fuck he was talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, there goes that theory. And then the third theory, which is also fascinating to think about, is kind of like a if you want to think about God as a source, or like everything is part of one, almost kind of thing. Like imagine God like the head of an octopus, and then all of us are endless tentacles of that same octopus experiencing different things, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
And
this
then
is also very similar to like the Freemasons thought, like God is a power or energy, not like a being. It's something you're a part of. It's not something that is intelligent like on its own, right? It's or even like the Gnostic principle of the sleeping God that imagines everything, right?
yeah, a lot of people call I kind of am leaning towards this, that we are God, right? That's kind of
Right.
where
This
my
is
belief is. We are God. We come from a source. But there's also, there's obviously evidence to suggest that our consciousness, our being, continues after death, and we don't just go back to a collective consciousness. I don't think that's the case, because where would that information of, okay, I'm choosing my next life so that I can learn lessons, not so that we can learn lessons, but so that I can learn a lesson, right?
it
So
seems the individual stays, right? Like through all these lives,
yeah,
you're not there. The individual always has a sense of itself. Um, okay, yeah.
yeah, that's exactly right. So those are the three kind of implications that I can think of: as one, reincarnation; two, psychic influence; and three, a collective consciousness. And I personally lean towards the reincarnation simply because of that exact thing you just said. The individual remains after death.
Yeah, even in astral projection, like I said, when you get to those higher states, you have, everyone talks about this, me versus them, or I'm sorry, no, there's a void, there's nothing, it's just me. And then, you kind of make this point also when people say they had near death experiences and it was just blackness. There was nothing there. It's like, well, you had an experience. So obviously there's not nothing. You were there and you understand. If it was nothing, you wouldn't say anything about it.
Yeah,
Like,
you were aware. You were aware
right.
of the darkness. It was dark
So
and it
there
was
was,
quiet. Yeah, you were aware of
yeah.
that.
And so that contrast always seems to be there, the individual at least. Man, so we're probably getting away from just the concepts basically, but I kind of want to, run a little bit further down this train of thought. You're you went through, you were raised a Mormon. I was also, so we were in the same boat. I liked it a lot. The reason I split from the church was because I was a big fan of my girlfriend, and I felt that I couldn't both, have a intimate relationship outside of the church and go to church and break bread or whatever. But I eventually came to atheism for different reasons. But we have similar paths. So we went from like, this kind of theism that was forced upon us, and then a break into atheism, and then almost a return to spirituality or mysticism. And you're entering in this. Has your opinion changed or evolved to another conclusion? Like, I know these are implications, but how do you feel having this knowledge and confirming these past lives? I mean, what do you think is going on? I mean, what does your heart tell you about what's next for you? Do you have insight into your own lives now? You have plans for your next life? I mean, how does that play into your personal belief systems and how they changed?
So my story is similar, and it's crazy that we both were raised Mormon. We both started a podcast about similar subjects. It's really, really interesting. Like, and then we kind of stumbled across each other. Makes you wonder. But my story, I literally, in my first episode, you can listen all about it, but I just basically did a little bit, like literally just surface level research into the history of the Mormon Church and their truth claims. As soon as you start to do just a little bit of digging, the whole thing just crumbles down and falls apart. So I was raised to believe that they were the one true church, and Joseph Smith found those golden plates and translated them from the little goggles, the Urim and the Thummim and all that stuff. And then he married other people's wives to help support them in their journey and not blah, 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 blah. But now he was totally banging those other people's wives. He sent people on missions so that he could marry their wives in secret. And the whole thing just falls apart. So I couldn't stay in the church and be honest with myself at the same time. So that's why I left. And then I dove straight into hating anything to do with religion and God. And I thought people were stupid for believing in any kind of religion and thought they were all just like a bunch of suckers. And then that kind of led me to realizing like, oh, okay, I guess when we die, we're just dead. Like we're just gone. And that was really depressing. And I kind of accepted it for a while, to be honest with you. I was just like, okay, I came to terms with it and moved on. And then I started looking into near-death experiences, and one thing led to another, and now we're here talking, right? So as far as my beliefs changing and my own plan for my own reincarnation, I really feel like I don't want to reincarnate. Like I hope
Really?
I hope that this is my last life. I really do. And
Wow.
you know what was wild? I was having those thoughts kind of like, I was like, if reincarnation is real, I kind of don't really want to come back to Earth. I don't really like it here, I think. And what was wild is I recorded a past life regression and uploaded it to my show. And I started referring to myself as a human. And I started talking to myself about like, yeah, he's a human. He doesn't understand. We both don't want to really reincarnate. And I was like, reincarnation is such a simple word. The way that you humans communicate is so slow. And I'm gonna release another episode that has a commentary on that, because there's a lot of stuff that I couldn't express when I was under hypnosis, because I was trying, and I've never had this experience before. I was trying to communicate with Fiona telepathically. That's like, for some reason, that's what I was trying to do. So I would say these really simple things, but then in my head, I was like, just basically like shooting all of this massive amounts of information that I can't even comprehend in my conscious state. Like, I had it all figured out when I was under hypnosis, and then I woke up and I was just confused. But
couple questions real there to stop you in the middle of your story.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Where did those thoughts come from? I know it's something that you've asked people before, is where those thoughts come from. Did you feel like those thoughts came from another part of your mind while you're under that hypnosis? And then what were you as opposed to a human, right? Like, did you have a sense of, if you're referring to something as being a human, that obviously implies you wouldn't believe yourself to be one, and even to the point where being a human would be condescending to you, right? You condescend down to being a human.
So I literally said the phrase, I don't think I'm a human, in that regression. One interesting thing about me, and I've talked about this a lot, I have a condition called aphantasia. Are you aware of what that is?
Yeah, I am. But do you dream though, or do you not dream either?
Yeah, I do dream, but I can't remember any details. Like, when I'm having the dreams, they're super vivid, but when I wake up, they're just gone. They're just like little. Oh, that was weird. I have had some super vivid, very, very disturbing dreams in the past. But all the dreams I remember are horrible. I can never remember any good ones, which is kind of weird. But yeah, as far as that goes, I don't have any self-talk in my head. I don't hear my own, like, apparently a lot of people will hear their own voice talking to them in their head. They call it self-talk or something. I don't have that. I don't have a voice talking in my head. When I close my eyes, it's just dark and quiet. Right. And so as far as like the thoughts coming from somewhere, I don't think it's possible, really, because I don't have like thoughts like that. You know, it's really weird to explain, because I can't really put it into words. I don't have thoughts. It's weird. Like, I don't have words going in my head.
So when you think in general, you don't know where that comes from in your brain. You don't have a location that you would target.
No, I do. Okay. I think I understand. Yeah. I've had this conversation before. It's like
right. That's what I was asking. And if that, you know, when you were in regression, did that, you know, entity that was like, hey, I'm not a human, did that have its own place where it was coming from? Like, was it the same place that you normally think from?
No. Thank you for bringing that up, because that's one thing. And I say it in the recording too. My thoughts come from the middle, like basically like the direct center of my brain, like almost like my brain stem, I feel like. And I felt like I was in my forehead, which was weird, because I don't ever have thoughts that come from my forehead.
That's where all my thoughts come from. But because I think I move my focus to that. So your thought at a certain level, you should be able to like move your thoughts to any part of your body, right? So like the best I can do is down the front of my head into my throat, where I can feel like that's where my mind is at. But a more developed practitioner is supposed to be able to feel like they're in their knee or in their foot, wherever. But however, I feel like instead it's subconscious, right? You're breaking through to that subconscious mind, and then you're giving it a language or an opportunity to speak. So it's interesting that if you're giving your subconscious mind an opportunity to speak, and your subconscious mind it doesn't even have visual representation to go off of because it's only going to go, it only knows what you know and has to go off the feel for everything else. Like imagine if you have no senses, right? But for it to be like, for it to not even recognize itself as human, if that would be my after 11 o'clock theory, is the subconscious mind that you're tapping into, and then when it's out, because of your lack of visualization or that input, it doesn't know, right? So it's just knows it's not a human. That's kind of how I took it. But was there did you have a sense of what it was instead of human?
No, not really. What she did is she tried to take me down this this hallway of doors where you pick a past life, and I was like, there's just so many. And she's like, yeah, there's so many that you'd like to go through. And I was like, no, I don't care about any of them. Like, I don't care about any of these doors. And what I was like getting impressions of was like almost like a skyscraper, basically. It was just like this massive skyscraper, but every single window that you would see was a doorway. But I said this in the regression. It was like I used the reference of Monsters Inc. to describe what I was seeing, where you could like summon a door and you would just appear in front of the door.
Now,
like, but it wasn't like that. I was seeing a skyscraper, but that was just like the only way I could really put it into words. Like I could summon a doorway, but instead of bringing the door on a little assembly line, I would just like, I would appear in front of the door and the door would appear in front of me. But there was nothing like that. I just used that to kind of describe what I was seeing. And it was just weird because she was like, what do you care about? I said, my collection of doors. I care about collecting doors.
How do you feel about like the Akashic record? What's your what's your feel on that? I mean, does it, because this what you're describing sounds similar? That's and I'm sure everybody knows listening what the Akashic records are, but it's this New Age theory, or it's a more of a New Age concept where you see it most often is in New Age, but it's also got some Eastern roots. But you know, it's very similar to what you're saying. Like you go in, typically there's a guide there that's like a librarian, but there's usually some form of representation of information. Generally, people want to see past lives, but all information is there of what's available. And you know what? But when people describe going to these places, Akashic records are always in a form of a way that they understand intuitively, like a forest or a library or a hallway, whatever. So, what's your view on the Akashic records, and do you feel like that fits into kind of what you're describing, where you have these doors of? I mean, I'm assuming those are past lives that you could open and remember or experience, and that you're just exhausted from doing all that and you're ready, like you've done all of it. You're just happy that you've done all of it and you're ready to check out and not do this anymore, move on to the next project, whatever is after this.
So as far as the Akashic records go, I am not super well versed. I don't want to say something dumb, but like I've heard about it. I'm trying to get someone on my show that knows a lot about it to come talk about it. Enough people reference it that makes me think that there's the concept might have something behind it. But I think like the name Akashic Records might have been popularized and just kind of used mainstream. As far as what happened to me, one thing I said was like, I said that I don't want to come back and I feel like I have enough doors. And she's like, okay, well, what do you want to do? And I said, and this really surprised me for some reason. I would not have expected myself to say this. She said, what do you want to do then? And I said, I want to create things, but I don't have enough experience, which was weird. Because like, I don't really want to create anything in this life, like except for my podcast, but that's more satisfying my own curiosity in my head. And I don't know. It was just weird. I was like, I want to create things, but I don't have enough experience. And there's a couple other things I said that surprised me as well.
Are you familiar with Terrence McKenna and heard him talk about his DMT trips?
No, I'm familiar with Terrence, but I have not really looked at too much of his work or his stuff.
It leads in what, you can tell me what your other things were, but I just want to say that there's other suggestive things out there that like lean into what you're saying. For instance, Terrence McKenna, he's, pioneer of all these psychedelic drugs, but one of his concepts is this thing towards infinite novelty or complexity upon complexity, or to boil it down, the nature of creation is to create things. So the ultimate form or the ultimate realization of a being um, is something that makes something that makes something, right? And you have to have the entire, you have to have knowledge of the entire universe to make, I guess a seed grow or something like that. But anyways, it lends to this idea, like, what are people learning? What are they here to figure out? What's the purpose of that path? And in some traditions, you don't get out of reincarnation until you've completed all the things that you're supposed to know. Now, the process for doing that of enlightenment is not easy, right? Like, it's a very rigorous, laid out plan. And I would say that, at least according to them, if you're not following that tradition, you're probably not going to end up like you think it's going to end up. But what you're saying does lend to this idea of a picture. What is the path of a human being? What's at the end of the line, at the end of all these reincarnations? And your first thing is to create. And it's funny, if you remember, I'm sure you do, but isn't that like the ultimate goal of like the top level of the Mormon heaven, right? You get to be God if you are just good enough. And you get to be a creator with your own world and your own planet and your own beings.
Yep. That the highest degree of the highest version of heaven, right? Like the top three of the top three.
Yeah. We don't have to get into it.
Yeah.
So you got in deep, right? You went to temples and were baptized for the dead, all that stuff.
Yeah, I was ready to go on a mission. Thank God I didn't, but like I was in, man. I was all in. So I know everything about it. I it's impossible to forget. It's
right.
bred. It was bred into me. But yeah, I mean, like, if you even look at just instinct on Earth of animals and stuff, like their goal is to create things on a basic level. My feeling when I was in that state was like, it's just so hard to describe because there was so much more information flowing than what I was saying, because I was trying to communicate telepathically for some reason, but I couldn't, because I was like, this brain can't comprehend what I'm trying to say. That's one other thing I said. But it was like the sense that I was getting was I was close, but I can't say anything for sure, man. I feel like you start out as like a really basic things to get like basic experiences down. And this is what I would say, like building on things of complexity and things like that. You start out basic, then you move up, and then you get more and more complex experiences, and you keep moving and moving and moving until you just experience. I don't know if life on Earth is like the last set of lives you live before you can get it. There's some people that have a really narrow-minded view of this that I've heard talk, where they say that you just specifically reincarnate to experience pain. But the thing behind that is that this gentleman had lost his son in a car accident or something. So that's kind of where I'm like, no, I don't agree with that. I think you come to experience everything you can. So that's like, you're going to experience pain, but you're also going to experience fun and sex and drugs and war and all that stuff and art and music. And you're not just coming here, in my opinion, to experience pain, because if you're going to create something, you need to know all the aspects about it that you want to embody, right? So you need to understand what it's like to feel heart-wrenching pain. You need to understand what it's like to feel so happy you can barely stand it. You need to know what it's like to feel moved by a painting or a play or whatever it is, right? You need to know all that stuff. So that's kind of what I think it is. But yeah,
Well,
it was
that's
just it was weird.
you're hitting on a really, I think, a really sensitive topic there. That is, I think makes people uncomfortable on both sides of the aisle, and it's that, what's the justification for what you're talking about? What's the justification for just pain and terror and misery? If we can, if I'm God and you're God and we're all God, why are we putting ourselves through these? And so that one of the, some a quibble that I have with past life regression, that I've heard, especially when it comes to trauma, is especially when it comes to, like, I don't know if you've heard of soul groups, but it's kind of this idea that these groups of souls reincarnate in each other's lives and they put each other through just total misery to teach each other's lessons. I mean, it gets pretty out there. It's like, your uncle agreed to be your uncle, so that he would molest you, and then you would have this experience, but he would also have this experience. And I have a really hard time. Like, if someone's telling me and I'm sitting across from them and they're telling me that, this kind of thing, I can be professional about it, but internally, I have a really hard time digesting that seriously. It's like, no, your uncle's a piece of shit. He needs to go to hell if there is, right. You know what I mean? Like, not that you have this loving agreement. Now, that's how I feel. That's my instinct, my level of how I feel about it. But the way that you're approaching it is kind of like, look, if you're going to be the creative universe and there's going to be both sides of the coin, you have to, how can you inflict that on someone else if you don't know what it's like yourself? And I'll finish up that thought with, in chaos magic, there's this thought exercise of, it's called, the soul is called Ka. And what it does is it starts off and it's just this blank, empty, dumb husk, and it goes through the experience of the material plane, and on its path it picks up debris, and that debris is you. You're not the soul itself. You're all the experiences that happen to you as you go up and down and up and down, in and out of carnation, over and over again. You become a more and more dense, solid object until finally you are eaten again by the source, and you start all over as a blank slate. So you're essentially your food, in that model. But I like the idea, especially the way that you position it, so that you are experiencing these things, so that you can have authority when you use them, or I guess, so to speak, because it's hard to justify, like, kids getting cancer or people losing loved ones and all that other stuff. And so when there is this greater power and I have any kind of control over it, I would end that immediately. You know what I mean?
Right. And like you'd think so. You'd think so. And what you're saying about, like, the soul groups and stuff like that, I had a really hard time, like, wrapping my head around, like, what if my biggest bully in my life is part of my soul group, and he came here just to be an asshole to me and make me hate my life, right? Or like you said, like, someone agrees to come here beforehand to assault you in some way. It's an uncomfortable thing to talk about, but here's the thing. Like you said, if I was God and you were God, if you want, like, happiness is desirable, right? That's what people want. That's inherently what people want to do, is be happy. Why wouldn't you? It feels good. But if you want to understand happiness, you have to understand what it's like to be unhappy, or the happiness means nothing. So in other words, you have to understand what it is like to inflict pain and also be on the receiving end of that. So if that is true, and people do agree to come back and be our greatest nemesis, or our greatest demon in our life, that's the only way that I could justify that belief, is that people agree to come here to receive things like that and to do things like that, so because they have to understand what it's like. Nobody inherently, I think, wants to do that, but I don't know. We're opening up a can of worms here that
I like it.
I'm not qualified to talk about. But.
No. We're well past being qualified. Look, So I'm gonna relate to that story, and then we probably start thinking about wrapping it up. But so I have past life memories, like with all the questions and doubt, casting, that kind of thing out there. I personally have felt that, and it's funny that you mention it because my experience is reverse. I felt that the majority of my like past lives have been spent inflicting mass pain from a purely clinical or necessary perspective. So it's in everyone's always important, right? Or at least I'm always the most important person in all my past lives. The most, but I have all these like memories of being a warlord or marching armies and being in and having cities burnt to the ground and the in my personal exploration of my inner mythology, like the explanation that was given to me for this life was like, you need to understand what you're tearing away from people, right? Like that's going to be part of your I guess general motif, through your existence, that this is something that you'll have to deal with. But this life is for me to understand what it's like to have a family, to have a son, to have a wife, to not be in these conflicts or wrapped up in things that are bigger than me, but to be here and just be a part of a family. Not so that I'll appreciate this to keep doing this, but so that the next time I'm in one of those lives where I have to like order some atrocity or move armies or whatever that is, and I'll keep in mind this is all coming out of literature that I read. I read that type of literature, but that so that I know what my decisions really mean. I know that when I say this needs to happen, that it's causing a certain amount of pain. That those decisions have consequences, and I need to understand what that pain is when I cause it. So the explanation to me for this, like, cause man, I got it good now. I wouldn't trade this for anything. You're like, I wouldn't come back if it was like this every time. I'd love to experience life. But and on the flip side, the reason for it is so that I know what I'm taking away from people when that happens, when that's the consequences of my actions. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And that kind of goes along with what I'm saying. Like you have to, if all this is legit, then you would have to understand it from both ends.
Yeah, I agree. So, hey, the last thing I'm going to ask you about, because I kind of want to get us into a more enlightened subject or a lighter hearted subject, is how your tarot practice is going, and if you're still keeping up with that.
The like the tarot cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I started doing it as an experiment because one of the first people that came on my show was like, you should try tarot cards and just do it for yourself. And I was like, that's interesting. I never even thought about that. So I bought a deck, and one of the first experiences that happened to me is, so this is going to be a little embarrassing, but I used to be like really into a certain video game, and I took it way too seriously one time, and I got mad and I punched my couch, and there's like a little dent in my couch now. I uninstalled the game from then and I stopped playing it. But there's still this dent in my couch.
Are you embarrassed because of your behavior or because of the game?
No, because of my behavior while playing the
What
game.
game?
It's called For Honor on Xbox.
Right on, got you.
Yeah, it's literally the heart. It's so toxic. Anyway,
right on.
I had
I know what it is.
Yeah, I then you understand. You get it. Because when you're playing that game, like in Call of Duty or something like that, you run around a corner, you get shot, you die. It's just wrong place, wrong time. But in For Honor, if someone beats you, it's because they're better than you, and then they teabag you and message you and tell you that you're trash and you should install the game. So yeah, and I was like top 0.03% in that game too, stats wise, because I was like a no lifer, and so I took it way too seriously. So I uninstalled, let all my stats drop, and now I'm having a way better time. But that hole is still in my couch, and I had my tarot cards sitting in the hole a little bit, so they were on an angle, leaning against my armrest. So like for this to happen, they had to go against gravity. But I was sitting there and I was just shuffling the cards, but hanging out. I put the cards down and they were leaning upwards, right? So a card, like, it was really freaky, bro. Okay, it was really freaky. I was sitting there and then out of the corner of my eye, like downward, I see a card just start to slowly slide off my deck against gravity, and it flopped onto the floor. And I kind of just like my wife didn't see it. And I looked at it, I was like, did you see that? And she's like, what? And I was like, that card on the floor just like slid off the deck. And she's like, that's creepy. I was like, yeah. So I grabbed it and I looked it up. I don't remember what the card was now, but one of the interpretations for it was the birth of a beloved child. And it actually had two cards on it. I thought it was just one at the time, but it was the card for like divine feminine energy, and the birth of a beloved child, which was, I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. I thought it was weird. Turns out a couple months later, we found out my wife's pregnant. And then later we found out, thank you. And then we found out it was a girl. So that was awesome. Weird. That was weird.
Now, are you, you're kind of just like now getting into this type of thing. I expect that your practice is going to evolve pretty dramatically. Have you had stuff like this happen to you before? Or is this kind of new, like where things are happening around you that are more, I guess, mystical or spiritual or like weird? Are you feeling presence of energy? Do you are you encountering more like paranormal phenomenon, that kind of thing? Because that's pretty exceptional, you know what I mean? Like for cards to jump out of the deck and then they predict, I mean, that's a strong suggestion. I mean, even beyond you, the implication there is something is not, it's not like the deck jumped out on its own. It's like somebody's like, hey, look at this. Do you feel you said you have spiritual guards, that giant owl thing? You think your Moloch reached in there and grabbed a couple cards out of the deck, or is this?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I've lived, like, I've had a lot of ghost stuff happen to me in my life, and that's
okay.
That's a whole episode in and of itself, because I've lived in haunted houses forever until
so
this
you were
one.
Sensitive to paranormal activity, right? Your whole life, especially, I would say even from before puberty.
Oh yeah, before puberty, man. Like I'll tell one story. Okay, I'll tell one story, and then I'm not going to go into it, because if I go down this rabbit hole, it's going to be a long time. But
I know, but the reason I know it's there. So yeah, go ahead.
I this one time I was climbing down from the top bunk of my bed, and my dad worked graveyard shifts, so there was no other man in the house. It was just my brother, my sister, my mom, and me. And I was probably like 6 or 7 at the time. I was climbing down from the bunk bed to go to the bathroom to go pee, and my ear was right next to the wall, like the outside wall. It was just a wall, man, and it was like inches from this wall, and I just hear a man's voice go, "Where you going?" It was so fucked up, bro. I was like, ah! I ran to the bathroom and closed the door and slept with the light on in there. I grabbed a towel off the rack and just slept on the floor. My mom comes in the next morning to take a shower or whatever, and she's like, "What are you doing on the floor?" And I was like, there was someone in my room, and she's just like, "Oh yeah, whatever." Now, that being said, with the history of paranormal activity, as far as like my guides go, I don't know. I really don't know. One of the goals of that session, of that regression that I told you about, where I referred to myself in the third person as a human, one of the goals was to find out why I feel that I can't really communicate with my guides. And she said, she said something like, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was something about getting information. There's something about, like, I feel like she said, oh, here's what it is. She said, I feel like Ian's supposed to be doing something, or he has some kind of a mission. This is based off of what I'd said previously in the session. And she said, what does he need to do in order to move forward with this? Or what does he need to know? And I sat there for a second and I said, that information is prohibited. So that was weird.
So I've done something similar where instead of it being myself, I actually I paid a woman. She's on Facebook and Instagram. It's a wandering witch, Navie Alora, I think. I hope I pronounced that name right. Anyways, y'all can find her. And it was, reasonable. It's like $60 for an hour or something in there. But don't hold me to her rates. And she did something like that. So this is reversed, right? So what I do, it's kind of like regression, but it's she's telling me what they're saying, right? Does that make sense? So she's like, okay, I have somebody here and they're telling me this, and this. And I'll be like, okay, well, what about this? And then she'll say, okay, well, this person is coming forward and they're saying this, and this. And something very similar happened where they were like, okay, it was about my brother. And they were like, nope, they're not letting me get this information. Like, this is off like limits. And I don't really feel like anything super helpful came out of that. But I do remember that coming up, right? Like all the information that she said, I felt was like super important relative to me. But that was one thing that was very similar to what you just said, where there is a point where they're just like, nope, this is not ready, or it's not time for this information to come out yet, which is kind of frustrating, right? Because like you're ready to move on or go to the next step. It's like, yeah, too bad, right? Like, so what? What's the resolution there?
Okay, well, what now? What now? Right? Yeah. I
like,
feel you. Yeah, man. Well, Caleb, it's been really great having you come on my show, and obviously we're uploading this on your show too, so it's great for me to come on your show, right?
Yeah.
But so I'll let you plug your show for my podcast, and I'll plug my show for your podcast.
Okay, right. Well, real quick, again, it's the Free Range Mystics podcast. We have a couple seasons out right now, and we're working on a third. It's a disaster, but once we get it out, it'll be great. And we're on Spotify. It's spelled like it sounds, and you'll find it. I trust in your adult abilities to Google foo. Your turn, bud.
Yeah, so my podcast is called The Regression Session. I just invite people on to talk about their past life experiences, psychics, past life regression practitioners. I've had some authors come on there, notably Joanne DiMaggio. So she was pretty awesome. She's written like 6 books. So check it out. I'm also on every single podcast platform, ? I think I'm working on that, but yeah, you can find me on any of them. Just The Regression Session.
It's a good show. Listen to it. I do.
Well, thanks. I listen to yours too, man.
Right on. Cool, Ian. Thank you so much for having me on. Namaste, all that happy shit. I want to do it again, though, so let's not let this be a one-off. I think we could probably dive into a lot of subjects.
That's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Caleb for coming on to the show and interviewing me, and I had a really great time talking to him. And I'd also like to thank you for tuning in. Head on over to the Free Range Mystics podcast. Check them out. Also, head on over to Facebook and follow me for some additional content. Do it. If you like the show, I'd appreciate you subscribing in your podcast player and sharing the show around with anyone you think might be interested, or even someone who you think would be interested in coming onto the show. If you're interested in coming onto the podcast and talking with me about your experiences, send me an email. My email is theregressionsession@gmail.com, and I would love to have you on the show.
Giving up